Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the patch preview for 1320. So, as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Check out the rest of the content as well. I am going to do a support tier list. I know I'm kind of late on this one, so I'll probably just do a support tier list for what's going on in the next patch for 1320. And just skip the 1319 one. But yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get in here. And we do stream most nights, usually around 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time till about 1 a.m. Sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later. So come by, check it out if you want to talk about League or anything else you're interested in. Always happy to hang out with people. Okay, so they are doing a lot on this patch. I'm going to try to cover it as fast as I can. I actually only have about like 10 minutes or so, so I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, but there's a lot going on. It seems like the overall gist is that they want to lower jungle power, which I think is a good move because jungler is just way too strong. I feel at all levels of play, but especially at lower levels of play. And some people could argue, well, just get good, just don't get ganked. But even if they're constantly able to put pressure on your lane and force you to back off the wave, even if you don't actually physically die to the gank, the fact that they can sit on your lane determines a lot of the game at pretty much every elo bracket. Even high level play where people don't typically die early on to ganks, it still just takes away agency from the laners. It's like a lot of the decision making is just the jungler because, you know, for the better part of at least a year or two, from what I can remember, they've just been able to clear super fast and just sit on lanes, and they can just determine what's going on. So they should have the ability to gank, but I think that there should be a cost for that. If it's a failed gank, they fall behind. And if you fail enough ganks, it's really hard to get back into the game. Like, that's what I think it should be. I think there should be a balance between farming and ganking. I don't like to where you have hard carry junglers as well, like Karthus or something, that just turbo farm for 20 minutes and never do anything, or like Master Yi, and then they just show up with a bunch of items and take over the game. I also don't think that's good. But I think that having a situation where it does take some time to clear the camps, and if you don't clear the camps, then you're going to be falling behind is good. So they're nudging in that direction. They're also adding in a system where it makes it harder for people to poach those jungle camps. So they have like an anti-poaching or something they mentioned somewhere down here. But let's just go ahead and get in here, and we'll talk about it as we get to it. Okay. So Galio is coming down a little bit. His WCD, I believe that's his stun, his little AoE stun. The Q is the little gust of wind, and the E is like the Justice Punch. And then the passive shield is going to be available more often later on in the game. I think Galio is an interesting champion. He is very annoying for engage champs, but frankly, they probably need more answers to engage other than just super tanky frontline, like just encouraging more split pushing and more like pressure around the map, because stuff like TF, Galio, and Shin have been out of the meta for a while, and I personally, play a lot of recon, so I don't like it when Galio comes flying in and, stuffs my engage, or Shin, or TF, or whatever. But I think that it is useful to have those checks and balances so that the best comps aren't always just dive comps, which I don't think that's necessarily the case right now. But I think that having those high mobility champs across the map, those semi-global champs, is helpful to keep certain things in check. So ultimately, I think buffing him is probably a good idea, even though it's going to hurt Rakan a little bit if he comes back into the meta. Okay, Jinx is getting a little more health, 25 stacking bonus attack speed. So if you clear a wave with her, you just kill like 6 minions, and then you go at somebody, like, it's going to be big time damage. Now, I don't know if that includes killing people consecutively, like in a team fight, if it's also that bonus. But that's going to be nuts as far as her, like, attack speed going off if she gets, like, 2 or 3 kills in a row. It's going to be pretty crazy. But Jinx is somewhat underpowered right now. I don't think she's too horrible, but with the changes to, like, Gale Force, and she didn't like to get Gale in the first place, but she has even less, like, mobility options that are meta. And there are a lot of dive comps. There is a lot of mobility in the game, and she is vulnerable to that. So I think these buffs will help her out. Also, having your R available more often. But just them lowering the pressure of junglers is going to make these kind of longer range, lane dominant, or champs that are vulnerable to ganks a little bit stronger. Just because it's less likely they're going to have the jungler sitting on them at all times. So, also the Jinx is heavily tied to Enchanter performance a lot of times because she scales really well with stuff like Lulu, Ardent Sensor, all those kinds of different ADC buffing mechanisms. So the fact that those have fallen out of favor a little bit, at least at high end play, has hurt Jinx as well. So, buffing up Melia a little bit could potentially buff up Jinx a little bit, although they're not doing much to help out the other enchanters too much. So yeah, I think it's probably a good thing. Jinx is a somewhat interesting character. Again, she's like decent against Rakan. Those chompers are sort of hard to operate around, and she has a lot of range to harass. But I think those are fine buffs. Okay, Melio. So now his burn damage enables Chemtech Putrefier because when allies attack people with your passive on, then it counts as burn from you. So that does enable an interesting, makes that itemization better. The Putrefier, I think, has been really underwhelming for a lot of supports, at least that I've seen, because it's much easier to heal and shield, especially with something like Font of Life from your runes. It was much easier to trigger that, but now it's a lot harder for most champs. So that could add a little bit of niche, is that he's going to spread that really, really well if you need that healing and shielding cut. And then the cooldown on his shield is down a little bit, which is good, and the shield itself is up 20 baseline, which is nice, because remember, you can apply 2 of those to somebody, so that's 360 base on a shield. That's a lot. That's like a Karma empowered shield. And then the R healing is up a little bit in scaling as far as the AP goes. So, I mean, I don't know what Melio's win rate was. I've seen him. It still feels like he's decent. He's not as oppressive early, but he has a lot of protection later on. If you, like, double shield somebody to give them a 360 shield and then you just heal them for, like, 300 on top of that, and you're removing CC and giving them a ton of movement speed, like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good protection. So we might see him back in there a little bit. But yeah, I think these are good. Melio's not a super interesting champion. Like the little ball kick is kind of cool to stop mobility. But just having a few more enchanters be like in the conversation, I think is probably a good thing. Okay, then Morgana is doing a little bit more AP. They want her to be in the jungle for some reason. They're increasing her damage to jungle minions. Saw a groundhog running down the driveway. And then her stun duration is up to half a second longer on the R at later levels, which is okay. So it's not going to affect support too much, because usually you don't get to level 16. But it's okay. I don't know. Ultimately, I think that they need to take some of the extremeness out of her kit. So they need to, I think, like, lower the amount of bind time on the Q and maybe give her W grounding or something so that she has 3 real abilities with a little bit of CC instead of, like, 1 ability with an extreme amount of CC. And, like, the E is also somewhat extreme, I think. So, I don't know. I don't think this is going to move the needle on her that much. But she used to be, like, there were a few patches where she did have a high win rate in the jungle. So maybe this brings it back. I don't know. And the Ziggs, that's going to make it a lot easier to hit your Qs. And that's going to help his wave clear out quite a bit. So, that's pretty nice. I mean, that's basically, 20% bigger hit radius. Because remember, that's on both sides, too. Radius is, half of a circle. So, that's interesting. He does have kind of a high win rate, I think. Some people are playing him bottom. I'm still not fully sold on that. It's like, yes, he does take towers, which is cool, and he does come online more than some ADCs earlier on, but you don't have that sustained damage as much, so you have to make sure you get that from other roles. But it is an interesting strategic option to have him available. Now, he's a pretty obnoxious champion in that his wave clear is pretty extreme, but since most people aren't just sitting there and sieging anyways, and almost everybody has a lot of wave clear, unless you have Baron, then maybe it's okay to give him a little bit more power. Akshan, nerfing him. Does anybody play that champ? I guess there's a few people that do. Maybe there's something going on in scrims at the high level that I'm just not really that sure about. But fine. Belveth, I'm not really going to read all that. They said up there that they want her to be squishier and more of a fighter. So she's getting like more movement speed later. Says I'm not going to read it. Proceeds to read it. Your damage can crit on your E. That's interesting. Is that her little flop? Or is that the where she like throws a bunch of stuff everywhere? I guess that's where she throws the stuff everywhere. Less damage reduction, a lot less at earlier levels, so only 42% instead of 70%. In the past, I don't think it's going to matter. I don't think she's like super relevant in the meta right now. She's okay. I think she'll continue to be okay. Kaisa probably did need to be nerfed a little bit. I'm surprised they're not like hitting her AP ratios. They did just hit Static Shiv a lot in the last patch, so maybe that brought her down a little bit. But she's just a very versatile champion that has like pretty good wave clear, decent burst damage in the early game for a hyper scaling champion that's also basically Vayne later with a dash and a huge shield. So making her a little bit more vulnerable early on is a good place to start, I think. And then Quinn, they're lowering her health a lot, so like 40 early. So if she does get grabbed by a Darius or something, it's much more likely she's going to die. I've saw one Quinn take off in my games, but in general, I think she's still like, she's a good lane bully. She can roam, but if you can force her into team fights, it feels like she doesn't really do that much. And then they're nerfing Zed. I feel like there's quite a bit of counterplay to Zed. They did buff the arm guard last patch, I think. So I don't know if they needed to do more against Zed, but maybe he's just too powerful with Dustblade. They are nerfing Dustblade a little bit on this patch too. So this is ridiculous. Like, this is a meme right here. This next one, Cassante. Like, I'm not reading all that. Like, seriously, what? Look at this. Is like 50 changes. Like, no joke. I don't even want to count how many changes that is. I swear to God, it's like 50 changes. How many lines is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 lines with multiple, like, changes per line. Seems like there's at least 2 changes per line with new mechanics. Like, you can't flash during certain things. The behavior of certain spells is changed. It's adding slows onto things, changing other behavior. Like, dude, what the hell? Like, who can even understand that if you do read it? Like, who can read that and just have a sense of, like, what that's actually going to do? Like, it's so many variables, so many little knobs you're turning, and he already has, like, 50 knobs on him. I don't know, man. They need to simplify this champ a lot. Like, he's just way too complicated. So, and it's like, something's adding reset, like, resets your Q, your R resets your Q cooldown, and it stacks now. Like, it's adding all new, like, interactions. I don't know. I think he is too strong in pro. You see him every game. I know he only has like a 50% win rate or something, but I just don't want to see Cassante versus Renekton every single game in pro at Worlds. I mean, they're like, he does have interesting moments tackling people through walls and stuff. Like, if it's going to be somebody, he's one of the better ones, I guess, that could be interesting, but I don't even know. Like, to me, it just says we have no clue what's really wrong with this champ. Let's just change everything. I don't know. But this is like the most I've ever seen. There are some champions, I think, this would be an interesting challenge. I'll bet there are some champions in the game since Season 1 that have not had this many changes cumulatively in 13 years. I'll bet there are. Now, I can't think, maybe Nasus or something. There's got to be some like old school champs that have had 50 or less changes in 13 years. Teemo, maybe? I don't know exactly, but there's got to be some. So I don't know. This is just ridiculous, like one patch, 50 changes. But I guess we'll just see how it shakes out because I have no clue what any of that actually is going to do. Blighted Jewel, okay, so that's a better intermediary item for magic users, so that's good. Youmuu's is going up in power. Is it really that weak? They said it's weak. I feel like it's still pretty good. And then they're nerfing Dustblade, which is good. They need to nerf the invulnerability part of it. That's like the most obnoxious thing. Like these little stats are kind of whatever. But at least they're doing something. Okay, they changed Doms to be better against shields. Okay. And then these are the jungle changes. So like basically they want it to take longer to kill monsters. They want anti-poaching, so they don't want laners to be able to take the monsters. So later in the game, it's more likely you're still going to get to scale. You're still going to get your farm. So this is better for those scaling junglers, for the Yees, the Karthuses, the stuff that just want to hog all the gold. This is better for them. And then I think they're tapping down the contested stuff to where it's not as strong. So yeah, you're getting a little bit less. They're giving it more health and a little bit less golden XP, I think. Individual dragons are worth less, which means like no one's going to go for drags early because you're already losing out on so much XP and gold by leaving the lane, and you're losing like your lane priority and everything. It's barely worth it right now. Especially like pre-6 going for a dragon. Even if you just killed the enemy lane, sometimes just coming back, you're going to be late on your reset, and then they're going to hit 6 before you, even though you just killed them and got a dragon. Like sometimes it's bad. So, I don't know. I feel like they've made the dragons so weak in general, and now they're just making them even weaker. These, like, individual dragons. Is anyone going to go for it? Like, it feels like it's going to be very far down the totem pole. It does make laning matter a lot more. They're also nerfing Herald Gold, and they're nerfing Plate Gold. So, they want a lot more of your gold to come from kills and assists, rather than objectives. And that's going to favor, like, lane-dominant champions, and snowballing off of kills rather than snowballing off objectives. I think that's less interesting gameplay overall. I think that contesting objectives, organizing, especially as a support, because that's where supports really come in a lot of times, is like securing and controlling vision and then controlling engages around objectives, I feel is one of the biggest like support functions. So support power is going to be down a little bit, or maybe that just favors stuff like Blitzcrank or Leona or just things that can force fights in lane. They're also nerfing a lot of the snowball runes, like that have ratios on them, so runes are going to scale a lot less. I think less damage in the game overall is probably good, especially less burst. Baron is harder to kill earlier in the game. So they're kind of, it seems to me like they're extending the game timers by doing all this by probably like 5 minutes. And they're putting less emphasis on individual dragons, although the souls are worth more if you get to soul. But it's basically like you're investing in something super long term that's going to have very little trade-offs. So trading a tower for a dragon, the person who gets the tower might actually really be ahead at that point if you're never going to be able to get soul. So, I think a lot of people are already sacrificing dragons. So, I don't know. I don't think they needed to nerf dragons, but anyways, we'll see. It's definitely going to shake up the meta, so I think that overall it's going to be a lot better for lane-dominant champions that can secure kills, get pressure, and, you know, maybe rotate to go pressure other lanes. It's going to favor scaling champs, because if you drop plates or dragons, it's not going to matter as much. And just sort of the way the jungle is shaking out, it's going to be a little bit better to farm the jungle as well. So I think we might be going back towards, you know, just protecting these hyper-scaling types of champs, your Jinxes, your Kog'Maws, maybe your Master Yi, your Karthus, and stuff like that, because games are going to take longer. You're less rewarded for ganking early. You're less rewarded for pressuring dragons, Rift Herald's plates early. So that should transition into, you know, later games, scaling champs are probably going to be better off. Is that a good direction? I don't know. I do feel like individual characters sometimes do snowball really hard in solo queue. So it just feels like so many games are determined by that one guy that's like 12-0 or something, you know, when everyone else on their team is like not doing anything. So I kind of wish that they would just like target the bounty system itself or something, and maybe give more for people that are really that high up. Something like that. Or if you keep killing the same character, maybe you get less and less. I don't know. But just like changing the whole system around to favor late game scaling. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, some of it could be pretty interesting. It'll be a lot of fun stuff to experiment with. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you next time.